The alarm on my console screamed before I even understood what it meant. Red light filled the command deck of my station, and every officer around me froze for half a second, the way people do when a nightmare becomes real instead of imagined. My name is Vesik Ondara, and I have served the Coalition Border Authority for 11 cycles. In that time, I have seen fleet battles, plague outbreaks, and diplomatic collapses that nearly ended in war. Nothing prepared me for what happened at Outpost Halvin, and nothing prepared me for the two words that followed it across every channel in our sector: Special Forces. I did not know what those words meant yet. I only knew that when the human liaison officer standing beside me heard them, her face went pale in a way I had never seen on a human before. Humans do not frighten easily. That is something every species in this galaxy learns quickly after first contact. They joke in the face of danger. They remain calm when reactors fail. They negotiate with weapons pointed at their heads. But the woman beside me, whose name was Claire Whitfield, did not joke when the alert came through. She simply stood straighter, her jaw tight, and whispered something I would not understand until much later. I hope it doesn't come to that. Outpost Halvin was a joint research station, built at the edge of neutral space, where coalition scientists and a small human science team studied atmospheric conversion technology. It was a quiet place, boring even, by the standards of border assignments. That is why the silence terrified me so completely. 3 hours earlier, Halvin had been transmitting routine data. Now there was nothing. No distress call, no emergency beacon, not even the automated systems that are supposed to survive total power failure. A station like that does not simply go quiet. Something makes it quiet. I was ordered to lead a small investigative team to the outpost, and because of the joint nature of the station, a human liaison team was assigned to accompany us. That is how I first met Claire Whitfield and her two colleagues, a quiet young man named Daniel Voss and an engineer named Grace Ellison. They did not carry themselves like soldiers. They wore simple gray uniforms, spoke softly, and treated every one of my crew with careful respect. If I had not known better, I would have thought they were ordinary technicians, not representatives of the species every part of this galaxy had learned to watch closely. "You seem tense," I said to Claire as our shuttle broke away from the station and began its approach toward Halvin's coordinates. "I don't like silence," she said. "Silence usually means something already happened, and we're just late to find out what." I asked her what she meant by the phrase she had whispered earlier. She hesitated, glancing at Daniel before answering. "There's a unit," she said carefully. "We don't talk about them much. Most people never see them in their whole lives. We just call them Special Forces. If things get bad enough that regular teams can't handle it, that's who gets sent." "Bad in what way?" She looked out the viewport instead of answering, and something about her silence unsettled me more than any answer could have. The trip to Halvin took 4 hours. During that time, my scanners picked up nothing unusual. No wreckage, no distress signals, no sign of an attacking force. The station's outer hull appeared intact from a distance. Whatever had happened, it had happened quietly. When we finally docked, the first thing I noticed was the temperature. The station's internal climate systems, normally kept at a comfortable range for both coalition and human physiology, had dropped low enough that our breath misted in the air. Emergency lighting flickered along the corridor walls, casting long shadows that made every closed door look like it was hiding something. "Life support failure," Grace said, studying a handheld scanner. "But it's not total. Someone shut certain sections down on purpose." "Why would anyone do that?" I asked. Nobody answered. We moved deeper into the station, in a tight formation, weapons drawn, but lowered, the way protocol demands during uncertain situations. My team consisted of 4 coalition officers besides myself, all trained for standard security response. The human liaisons stayed close to us, their expressions calm but alert, in a way that made me realize they were watching for something specific, something they expected to find and dreaded finding at the same time. The first body we found was a coalition researcher named Talvin Ors, a chemist I had met briefly during a supply rotation months earlier. He lay near the entrance to the main laboratory, his uniform intact, no visible injury. For a moment, I believed he might simply be unconscious. Then I saw his eyes. They were open, clouded over with a strange gray film, and his skin had taken on a texture that reminded me of dried plant fiber. Grace knelt beside him, careful not to touch his skin directly, and ran her scanner across his body. "Some kind of biological agent," she said quietly. "It's not natural. Look at the cellular breakdown pattern. This was engineered." "Engineered by whom?" I asked, though some part of me already feared the answer. "We found 4 more bodies in the laboratory, 3 coalition scientists and 1 member of the small human research team, a young man whose name I later learned was Oliver Bramwell. Unlike the others, Oliver's body showed signs of resistance, as if his own system had fought against the contamination for some time before finally failing." Claire knelt beside him for a long moment, her hand resting gently on his shoulder, saying nothing at all. "He held out longer than the others," Daniel said softly. "That matters. It means the agent isn't instantly lethal to humans. It means someone designed this to move slowly." "Why would anyone want it to move slowly?" I asked. "Because slow spreads further," Claire said. "Slow gives it time to reach other stations before anyone realizes what's happening." The full weight of what we were looking at settled over me like a physical pressure. This was not an accident. This was not a containment failure or an unfortunate lab experiment gone wrong. Someone had brought a weapon into Outpost Halvin and released it deliberately. We continued through the station, and the deeper we went, the worse the scene became. In the residential quarters, we found evidence that some of the staff had tried to seal themselves inside individual rooms once they understood what was happening. It had not saved them. Whatever the agent was, it had found a way through ventilation systems that no simple barrier could stop. In the station's central control room, we finally found someone alive. Her name was Ella Marsh, one of the human researchers assigned to the outpost. She was curled beneath a control console, wrapped in an emergency thermal blanket, her breathing shallow but steady. When she saw us enter, she flinched violently before recognizing Claire's uniform. "You're real," she whispered. "I thought I was imagining rescue again." "You're safe now," Claire said gently, kneeling beside her. "Can you tell us what happened?" Ella's account came out in broken fragments, the words of someone still trapped inside the memory of the last several hours. She described strange visitors arriving at the station 2 days earlier, claiming to represent a neutral research consortium seeking to review Halvin's atmospheric data. The station's coalition administrator had granted them access, following standard diplomatic protocol. Ella did not know exactly who they were, only that they left quickly, and the deaths began less than a day later. "They weren't coalition," she said, "and they weren't Rithari trade officials either, even though they used those credentials. I don't know what they were. I just know none of us questioned it because the paperwork looked official." I felt a cold understanding settle over me. Someone had used forged diplomatic credentials to gain access to a joint research station, deployed an engineered biological weapon, and left before anyone could react. This was not an act of desperation. This was calculated, patient, and deeply dangerous. "We need to get her out of here," Grace said. "And we need to determine if the agent is still active in the air." Claire nodded, then turned to look at me with an expression I had not seen from her before. It was not fear exactly. It was something closer to resolve, the look of someone preparing to make a decision they had hoped never to make. "Vesic," she said quietly, "I need you to authorize something." "What kind of something?" "An escalation request," she said. "Standard coalition and human joint protocol allows either side to request additional support when a situation exceeds the response capability of the team on site. I'm formally requesting that authorization now." I looked around at the frozen corridors, the bodies we had found, the survivor trembling beneath a thermal blanket, and the terrifying realization that whoever had done this could already be planning their next target. "What kind of support?" I asked. Claire hesitated only a moment before answering, and in that pause, I felt the full weight of everything I did not yet understand about the species we had called allies for the better part of a decade. Special forces, she said. I did not fully understand what those words meant. I only knew that saying yes to her request would change everything I believed about the limits of what our allies were capable of. I looked at the bodies around us, at the survivor who could barely speak from fear, and at the empty station that had once been full of quiet, careful work. I gave my authorization. Grace immediately moved to a secure terminal and began transmitting a coded signal, her fingers moving with practiced precision. Claire remained beside Ella, speaking softly to keep her calm, while Daniel positioned himself near the entrance, watching the corridor behind us with an intensity that told me he expected trouble even now. Within minutes, every communication channel on the station went dark, cut off by a signal I did not recognize, originating from somewhere beyond the station itself. I turned toward Claire, unsettled by the sudden silence pressing in around us. "What's happening?" I asked. She did not answer immediately. Instead, a single transmission crackled through the station's remaining emergency channel, calm and quiet, spoken in a voice that carried no urgency at all, despite the words themselves. "Special forces inbound. Clear the area." I looked at Claire, waiting for some explanation, some detail that would make sense of the strange dread now settling over the room. She only stared toward the corridor leading to the docking bay, her expression unreadable, as if she too were waiting to see exactly what was coming. None of us moved. None of us spoke. We simply waited, surrounded by silence, for whatever was about to arrive. The wait did not last long, but it felt endless. I have stood on the bridge of a ship during a fleet engagement, watched enemy vessels close in from 3 directions at once, and felt less uncertain than I did standing in that dim control room, listening to silence that no longer felt empty. "How many are coming?" I asked Claire. "I don't know the exact number," she said. "It depends on the situation. Sometimes it's a full team. Sometimes it's less than you'd expect." "Less than we'd expect for something like this?" I gestured toward the corridor behind us, toward the bodies we had found, toward the survivor still trembling beneath her thermal blanket. "This is not a small problem." Claire's expression did not change. "That's exactly why it won't take many." I did not understand what she meant, not yet. I assumed she was simply trying to reassure me, the way people do when they do not wish to explain something difficult. I would learn later that she meant exactly what she said, and that her calm was not comfort. It was certainty. Daniel remained near the corridor entrance, watching the darkened hallway with the kind of stillness that suggested years of training rather than simple alertness. Grace continued monitoring the station's systems, occasionally murmuring updates about power fluctuations and environmental readings that meant little to me in that moment. My attention remained fixed on the survivor, Ella, who had begun to speak again in fragments, her voice shaking. "They wore gray," she whispered. "The visitors. Gray coats, like they didn't want to stand out. I remember thinking it was strange that a diplomatic team would dress so plainly." "Do you remember anything else about them?" I asked. "Faces, voices, anything?" "One of them had a scar along his jaw," she said, "and they spoke Coalition Standard almost perfectly, but there was something off about the rhythm. Like it wasn't their first language, even though it should have been if they were really Rithari." I filed this detail away carefully. Whoever had done this had gone to considerable effort to disguise their identity, choosing a species whose credentials would raise the fewest questions among joint stations. The Rithari were known for cautious neutrality, rarely involved in disputes, which made their forged identity an almost perfect cover. "We need to warn other stations," I said. "If this group used forged credentials once, they can use them again." "That's already been transmitted," Grace said without looking up from her console. "The moment we confirmed a biological agent, the alert went out through every secure channel we have access to. Every joint station within 3 sectors has been notified to increase verification protocols." I felt a small measure of relief at that, though it did little to calm the deeper unease building inside me. Whoever had done this had planned carefully, executed precisely, and vanished without leaving any trace beyond forged paperwork and a room full of bodies. That kind of patience frightened me more than any direct attack could have. It was nearly 20 minutes later when the docking bay sensors flickered back to life, registering a single vessel approaching the station. I moved toward the nearest viewport, expecting to see a formation of ships, perhaps an escort of coalition or human military vessels, arriving to secure the area before any further response began. Instead, I saw one small, unmarked shuttle drifting toward the station with unhurried precision. "That's it?" I said. "That's the response to what happened here?" Claire joined me at the viewport, her eyes fixed on the approaching shuttle. "That's Special Forces," she said quietly. "They don't send fleets. They send exactly what's needed. Nothing more." I did not understand how a single small vessel could represent an adequate response to a bioweapon attack that had already claimed the lives of nearly a dozen people. But something in Claire's voice told me not to underestimate what was coming. The shuttle docked smoothly, without the mechanical clang and hiss I expected from an emergency arrival. It settled into place as quietly as if it had been performing routine maintenance rather than responding to a crisis. The docking bay doors opened, and for a long moment, nothing happened at all. No one emerged. No sound came from within the shuttle. I found myself holding my breath, uncertain what to expect, my hand resting instinctively on the weapon at my side, even though every instinct told me it would not be needed. Then the first figure stepped through the doorway. I do not know exactly what I expected to see. Perhaps something resembling the armored soldiers I had encountered during joint training exercises with human forces years earlier, heavily equipped, imposing in stature, carrying weapons designed to intimidate as much as to function. What I saw instead was almost disappointing in its ordinariness. A woman stepped through first, wearing a simple dark uniform, without insignia or rank markings, carrying equipment that looked practical rather than excessive. She moved with quiet efficiency, her eyes scanning the docking bay in a single sweeping glance before settling briefly on our group. She said nothing, offered no greeting, simply continued forward as three more figures followed behind her. They moved without wasted motion, without unnecessary conversation, communicating through small gestures I did not recognize. Hand signals passed between them in complete silence. Whatever coordination existed between them required no spoken words at all. "That's them?" I asked Claire, unable to keep a note of disbelief from my voice. "4 people? 4 is a lot, actually," she said. "For something like this, 4 means they're taking it very seriously." I looked back toward the approaching figures, trying to reconcile the image before me with the dread I had witnessed on Claire's face when this operation was first mentioned. They looked ordinary, capable certainly, disciplined in their movements, but nothing about their appearance suggested the kind of overwhelming threat that could justify the reaction I had seen from every human I had spoken with since this crisis began. The woman leading the group approached us directly, her expression calm, professional, almost gentle in its neutrality. Up close, I could see faint marks along her forearms, old marks that suggested a long history of difficult work, though her face remained unlined, younger than I expected. "Claire," she said, nodding briefly in greeting. "Daniel, Grace." Her eyes moved to me last. "You must be the coalition officer who authorized our deployment." "Vesik Ondara," I said. "I did not expect so few of you." "Numbers aren't the point," she said simply. "My name is Hannah Voss. This is my team." She gestured toward the 3 figures behind her without offering names, and I noticed none of them seemed bothered by this lack of introduction, as if such formalities mattered little to their purpose. "We were told this was a serious situation," I said carefully, uncertain how to phrase my doubt without sounding disrespectful. "I do not wish to question your capability, but I do not understand how 4 individuals represent an adequate response to what we found here." Hannah's expression did not change, but something in her eyes shifted, a flicker of understanding rather than offense. "You're not wrong to ask that question," she said. "Most people do, the first time they see us. Let me put it this way. We're not here because we're strong. We're here because we're precise, and precise is what a situation like this actually needs." I did not fully understand her meaning, but before I could ask further questions, one of the other team members, a tall man with quiet eyes, moved past us toward the corridor leading to the laboratory where we had found the bodies. He said nothing, simply began working through the scene with quiet efficiency, examining details our own scanners had missed entirely. "That's Nathan," Hannah said, following my gaze. "He'll handle forensic analysis. We need to understand exactly what agent was used, and more importantly, who had the capability to create it." "You believe you can identify the responsible party from a biological sample?" I asked. "We've handled situations like this before," she said simply, offering no further detail. Grace approached Hannah then, sharing the data she had gathered during our earlier investigation, the description Ella had provided of the visitors, the forged credentials, the timeline of events leading up to the attack. Hannah listened carefully, asking precise questions, her expression growing more focused with each new detail. "Forged Rithari credentials," she said finally. "That narrows things considerably. Not many groups have the resources or the motivation to impersonate a neutral species specifically to avoid suspicion." "You have a suspicion already?" I asked. "I have several," she said, "but I won't act on suspicion alone. We'll confirm what we can here first." Over the following hour, I watched Hannah's team work through Outpost Halvin with a thoroughness that put my own investigative training to shame. Nathan analyzed biological samples with equipment far more advanced than anything our station possessed, identifying not just the composition of the weapon, but subtle markers that suggested its origin. Another member of the team, a woman named Ivy, reviewed the station's damaged security systems, somehow recovering fragments of footage that our own technicians had declared unrecoverable. The fourth member of the team, a quiet young man introduced only as Felix, remained near the survivor Ella throughout the process, speaking with her gently, gathering additional details about the visitors without ever making her feel pressured or frightened. His patience with her was remarkable, especially given the urgency of the broader situation. "You said one of them had a scar along his jaw," Felix said softly, showing Ella a series of images on a small display. "Would you recognize him if you saw his face again?" Ella studied the images carefully, her hands still trembling slightly, though less than before. "That one," she said finally, pointing toward one of the images. "I think that's him. I can't be completely certain, but something about the eyes looks right." Felix nodded, making a quiet note, then continued speaking with her in a tone so calm and reassuring that I found myself watching him with growing curiosity, rather than the wariness I had felt toward the team upon their arrival. "You seem surprised," Claire said quietly, noticing my expression as I observed the team's methodical work. "I expected something different," I admitted, "something more forceful." "That's the mistake most people make," she said. "They think the name means violence. It doesn't. It means whatever the situation requires, done exactly right, without waste." By the time Hannah's team completed their initial assessment, they had gathered more actionable information than my own team had produced in hours of searching. Nathan approached Hannah with a small data device, speaking too quietly for me to hear the details, though I noticed her expression sharpen slightly as she reviewed whatever information he had uncovered. "We have a probable origin point," Hannah said, turning back toward us. "The biological signature matches research conducted by a faction operating outside both coalition and human jurisdiction, a group that has been quietly acquiring dangerous technology for several years without drawing significant attention." "You know who did this?" I asked. "We have a strong indication," she said. "Confirmation will require further investigation, which my team will continue independently from this point forward." "And the immediate danger here?" I asked. "The remaining contamination? The safety of any additional survivors?" "Already being addressed," she said, gesturing toward the corridor where I could see Ivy working alongside Grace, coordinating a careful decontamination sequence using techniques and equipment I had never seen before. "The station will be safe within the hour. Ella will be transported to proper medical care immediately." I found myself studying Hannah closely, trying to reconcile the calm, methodical woman before me with the dread I had witnessed on every human face since this operation began. She did not seem dangerous. She seemed capable, controlled, disciplined, in a way that inspired quiet confidence rather than fear. And yet, as I watched her team continue their work with silent, practiced precision, moving through the station like they had memorized every corridor before ever setting foot inside it, I began to understand, if only slightly, why the mere mention of their designation had been enough to silence an entire shuttle full of coalition and human personnel alike. This was only the beginning of what I would witness that day, and I did not yet know how much further my understanding of special forces would be tested before the situation reached its conclusion. The alarm came without warning, cutting through the quiet efficiency of the decontamination work like a blade through fabric. Ivy's voice rose sharply from the corridor, and every member of Hannah's team moved at once. No discussion, no hesitation, simply immediate and coordinated response. Unregistered vessel, approaching the far docking arm, Ivy called out. Same signature pattern as the one described by the survivor. They're coming back. I felt my chest tighten. Coming back for what? The weapon was already deployed. To finish the job, Hannah said, already moving toward the corridor with the rest of her team falling into formation behind her. Or to eliminate any witnesses left alive. Either way, we're not letting that happen. I followed alongside Claire, my hand tightening around my weapon, though I quickly realized I was moving faster than necessary, simply trying to keep pace with a team that seemed to have already mapped out every possible outcome before the threat had even fully materialized. Grace, seal the medical bay, Hannah said without turning her head. Felix, stay with Ella. Nathan, Ivy, with me. And them? Nathan asked, glancing briefly toward myself and my remaining coalition officers. They stay behind unless needed, Hannah said. This isn't about strength in numbers. It's about not adding confusion to a situation that requires precision. I wanted to argue, some instinct within me resisting the idea of standing aside while danger approached the station under my jurisdiction, but something about the calm certainty in Hannah's voice made me hesitate. Claire placed a hand briefly on my arm. Trust me, she said quietly. This isn't the moment to prove anything. Let them work. I nodded reluctantly, remaining near the medical bay entrance with my remaining officers, while Hannah, Nathan, and Ivy moved swiftly toward the docking arm where the unregistered vessel was approaching. Through the station's remaining functional sensors, I watched their progress on a small display, my pulse quickening with every passing second. The vessel docked without authorization, forcing its way through a secondary connector that had not been designed for unregistered access. Alarms flared briefly before falling silent, and I realized Hannah's team had already suppressed the warning systems, choosing silence over alerting whoever was aboard the approaching craft. They know we're aware of them, Grace said quietly from beside me, watching the same display, but they don't know how ready we are. Through the grainy feed from a damaged security camera near the docking connector, I watched 3 figures emerge from the vessel, moving cautiously through the station's dim corridors. They wore the same plain gray coats Ella had described, their movements careful but confident, clearly expecting to encounter no meaningful resistance. They were wrong. Hannah's team intercepted them in a narrow corridor section leading toward the laboratory, and what followed happened with a speed that made it difficult for me to process even while watching directly. There was no lengthy confrontation, no exchange of words or warnings. Hannah moved first, closing the distance between herself and the nearest intruder before he had fully registered her presence, disarming him with a controlled motion that left him restrained against the corridor wall within seconds. Nathan handled the second intruder with similar efficiency, using the confined space of the corridor to his advantage, ensuring the man had no room to react before he too was subdued and secured. Ivy moved toward the third figure, who attempted to retreat back toward the vessel, only to find her path blocked before she had taken more than a few steps. The entire encounter lasted less than a minute, and not a single shot had been fired, not a single unnecessary motion made. I stood watching the display in stunned silence, struggling to reconcile what I had just witnessed with the violence I had expected from a confrontation of this nature. "They're not dead," I said quietly, more to myself than to anyone else. "They wouldn't be," Claire said beside me. "Special Forces doesn't operate that way unless there's no other option. Living captives answer questions. Bodies don't." I watched as Hannah's team secured the 3 intruders, binding them carefully while Nathan began scanning their vessel for any additional threats or information. Within minutes, the situation that had filled me with such dread only moments earlier had been resolved with a level of control that left me questioning everything I believed about how conflicts of this nature typically unfolded. Hannah's voice came through the station's remaining communication channel a short while later. "Vesic, we need you at the docking connector. There's something you'll want to hear directly." I made my way through the corridors with Claire and Grace, arriving at the scene to find the 3 captured intruders seated against the corridor wall, restrained but conscious, their expressions ranging from defiance to visible fear. One of them, a man with a faint scar along his jaw matching the description Ella had provided, glared at Hannah with open hostility. "You have no jurisdiction here," he said, his voice tight with anger. "This station falls under joint coalition and human authority. Whatever organization you represent has no standing to detain us." Hannah regarded him with an expression of mild patience, as though his objection were entirely expected and equally irrelevant. "You used forged Retheri credentials to gain access to this station," she said calmly. "You released a biological agent that killed nearly a dozen people, and you returned to eliminate any survivors before evidence of your involvement could spread further. I think jurisdiction is the least of your concerns right now." The man's expression flickered, a brief crack in his composure, before he steadied himself again. "You cannot prove any of that." "We already have," Nathan said, holding up a small device displaying data recovered from the vessel's onboard systems. "Your travel logs match the timeline of the attack precisely. Your biological signature matches trace contamination found in the laboratory, and your associate here," he gestured toward one of the other captured men, "was foolish enough to keep a partial record of the compound's formulations stored on this vessel's systems." I watched the color drain from the second man's face as Nathan's words settled over him, the realization of his own carelessness clearly striking harder than any physical confrontation could have. "Who do you work for?" Hannah asked, her tone still calm, though something in her voice carried an unmistakable weight of authority. The scarred man remained silent, his jaw tightening with defiance. Hannah did not press further, simply nodding toward Ivy, who began carefully transferring the recovered data to a secure storage device for further analysis. "We'll get our answers," Hannah said quietly to me, noticing my confusion at her apparent lack of urgency in extracting information from the captives directly. "Not through force, through patience, and through the evidence they've already given us, without realizing it." I found myself studying the captured men, trying to understand the organization capable of orchestrating such a calculated and ruthless attack. "Do you know who sent them?" I asked. "We have strong suspicions," Hannah said. "A faction operating outside recognized coalition and human territory, one that has been quietly acquiring dangerous technology and testing it against unprotected targets, likely searching for a weapon capable of destabilizing joint stations without triggering an immediate large-scale military response." "To what end?" I asked. "Fear," Claire said quietly beside me. "If joint stations become associated with sudden, unexplained tragedy, cooperation between our species begins to fracture. Trust erodes. Alliances weaken. It's not about a single attack. It's about undermining everything the coalition and humanity have built together." The weight of that realization settled heavily over me. This was not a simple act of aggression or an isolated attack born of desperation. It was a calculated strategy designed to unravel years of careful diplomatic progress, one station, one tragedy at a time. "You stopped it here," I said. "But if this is part of a larger pattern, there will be other stations, other attacks." "Which is exactly why we need everything they know," Hannah said, gesturing toward the captured men. "And why patience matters more than force. In situations like this, a frightened captive who believes he has no options left will often provide more useful information through careful, methodical questioning than through any forceful interrogation. Over the following hour, I watched Hannah's team work with the same calm precision they had displayed throughout the entire operation. Felix, who had remained with Ella throughout the confrontation, eventually joined the others, bringing news that Ella's condition had stabilized enough for safe transport to proper medical facilities. Ivy continued analyzing the recovered data from the intruder's vessel, uncovering fragments of communication logs that hinted at a larger network of operatives, though nothing yet concrete enough to identify the organization's leadership or ultimate objectives. Nathan worked alongside her, cross-referencing biological samples with known databases, searching for any connection to previous incidents that might have gone unnoticed or unreported. Throughout this process, Hannah remained close to the captured men, not questioning them directly, but simply present, her calm demeanor somehow more unsettling to them than any aggressive interrogation could have been. I noticed the scarred man glancing toward her repeatedly, his earlier defiance slowly giving way to visible unease. "Why does she make him so nervous?" I asked Claire quietly. "She hasn't said more than a few words to him since this began." "That's exactly why," Claire said. "People expect anger, threats, pressure. When none of that comes, when someone simply waits, patient and unbothered, it becomes far more unsettling. He doesn't know what she's planning, and that uncertainty is doing more work than any direct threat ever could." By the time additional coalition security vessels arrived to assist with securing the station and transporting the captured operatives for further questioning, the immediate crisis at Outpost Halvin had been fully resolved. The remaining contamination had been neutralized, Ella had been safely transported for medical care, and the 3 individuals responsible for the attack were now in custody, along with a growing collection of evidence pointing toward a larger and more dangerous conspiracy. As the station gradually returned to a semblance of order, I found myself standing near the docking bay alongside Hannah, watching as her team prepared to depart alongside the captured operatives and the evidence they had gathered. "You handled this with a precision I did not expect," I admitted. "I confess, when I first heard the name Special Forces, I anticipated something far more forceful, far more destructive." Hannah studied me for a long moment before responding, her expression thoughtful rather than defensive. "Most people do," she said. "It's not really about force. Force is easy. Anyone can apply force. What's difficult is knowing exactly how much is needed and stopping exactly there." "And if more had been needed here?" I asked. "If those 3 men had chosen to resist rather than allow themselves to be captured?" Hannah's expression did not change, though something in her eyes grew slightly more distant, as though recalling memories she did not wish to revisit in detail. "Then the outcome would have been different," she said simply. "But it wasn't necessary today, and I'm grateful for that." I did not press further, sensing that her answer, though brief, carried far more weight than the simple words suggested. As her team prepared their vessel for departure, I found myself reflecting on everything I had witnessed over the past several hours. The quiet efficiency, the careful restraint, the unsettling calm that had somehow proven more effective than any display of overwhelming force could have been. I understood now, at least partially, why the mention of special forces had been enough to silence an entire room of experienced coalition and human personnel alike. It was not fear of destruction that inspired such reaction. It was the understanding that these individuals represented something far more precise, far more controlled, and in many ways, far more unsettling than simple violence could ever be. As Hannah's shuttle departed from Outpost Halvin, carrying the captured operatives and the evidence needed to unravel whatever larger conspiracy lay behind this attack, I remained standing at the viewport, watching until the vessel disappeared into the darkness beyond the station. I did not yet know how much more I would learn about the organization behind this crisis, nor how deeply this single incident would reshape my understanding of humanity's true capabilities. But I knew, standing there in the quiet aftermath of that terrifying day, that I would never again dismiss the quiet dread that crossed a human face whenever those 2 words were spoken aloud. 3 days after the events at Outpost Halvin, I received an unexpected summons to a joint debriefing facility on coalition territory, a quiet administrative station used primarily for diplomatic meetings rather than military operations. I had assumed my involvement in the incident had concluded once the captured operatives were transferred to proper custody, but the summons specifically requested my presence alongside representatives from the human liaison team. When I arrived, I found Claire, Daniel, and Grace already present, along with a familiar face I had not expected to see again so soon. Felix sat near a viewport overlooking the station's central garden, a small cup of what smelled like strong coalition tea resting in his hands, looking remarkably relaxed given the circumstances that had brought us together. "Vesik," he said, offering a small smile as I approached. "I was hoping you'd be here. Hannah thought it might help to have you involved in the review process, given your first-hand experience with the operation." "I did not expect to see you again," I admitted, taking a seat across from him. "I assumed, once the immediate crisis was resolved, your team's involvement would end there." "Not quite," he said. "Situations like this rarely conclude with a single confrontation. There's usually a great deal of quiet work that follows, work that doesn't involve nearly as much excitement as what you witnessed at Halvin." "Paperwork," Claire said dryly from nearby, settling into a chair beside Daniel. "An enormous amount of paperwork." Felix chuckled softly. "She's not wrong. Honestly, the reports and documentation following an operation like this are far more exhausting than the operation itself. I'd rather face another difficult situation than fill out another incident summary form." I found myself smiling slightly at his tone, the casual humor feeling strangely out of place given the seriousness of what we had all witnessed just days earlier, yet somehow it made the entire team feel more approachable, more genuinely understandable. "May I ask you something?" I said carefully. "Something about your organization, about Special Forces specifically." Felix set his cup down, studying me thoughtfully before nodding. "You can ask. I can't promise I'll be able to answer everything, but I'll tell you what I'm able to share." "When this began," I said slowly, "every human I encountered reacted to the mere mention of your designation with visible unease, even fear, and yet, having now witnessed your team in action, I struggle to understand why. You did not display excessive force. You did not act with cruelty or aggression beyond what the situation required. If anything, your restraint impressed me more than any display of strength could have." Felix was quiet for a long moment before responding, his expression growing more serious. "That reaction isn't really about what you saw," he said finally. "It's about what our existence represents." "I do not understand," I admitted. "Special Forces wasn't created because humanity wanted an elite unit to be proud of," he said. "It was created because of necessity, born out of some of the most difficult periods in our history. Long before we ever left our homeworld, humanity faced conflicts and disasters that ordinary response simply couldn't resolve, situations where speed, precision, and difficult decisions mattered more than overwhelming numbers or force." "Difficult decisions," I repeated. "The kind most people hope they never have to make," he said quietly. "Choosing who can be saved when not everyone can be. Acting without hesitation when hesitation would cost more lives. Understanding that sometimes the right choice isn't the comfortable one." I considered his words carefully, beginning to understand the weight behind them, and this became a formal organization over time. "It evolved," Felix said. "What began as small groups of individuals willing to take on the situations no one else wanted, situations too dangerous, too uncertain, too morally complicated, eventually became something more structured, not larger necessarily, but more refined, more precise." "Why keep it so quiet, though?" I asked. "Why does even mentioning your existence create such unease among your own people?" Claire answered this time, her expression thoughtful. "Because the moment people start relying on us too easily, something has already gone wrong," she said. "We're meant to be the exception, not the rule. If our involvement becomes common, that means regular systems have failed too often, that danger has become too normalized. The unease isn't really about you," she glanced toward Felix. It's about what your presence means for the situation itself. I sat with this understanding for a long moment, reflecting on everything I had witnessed at Halvan, the calm efficiency, the careful restraint, and now, the deeper context behind why such capability existed in the first place. "May I ask something else?" I said. Felix nodded, gesturing for me to continue. During the confrontation with the captured operatives, Hannah mentioned that the outcome might have been different had they chosen to resist. I understand the general meaning behind that statement, but I find myself curious about how such decisions are made in the moment. How do you determine when restraint is appropriate and when it is not? Felix considered this carefully before answering. "It's not really a decision made in the moment," he said. "It's something built through training, through experience, through understanding the full context of a situation before ever engaging directly. We don't choose restraint because we're being generous. We choose it because it's usually the most effective path toward resolving a situation completely, not just ending a confrontation." "And when it isn't the most effective path?" I asked. His expression grew somber, though his voice remained calm. "Then we do what's necessary," he said simply. "But that's always the last option, never the first." Grace, who had been quietly observing our conversation, spoke up then. "I think what surprises most people," she said, "is that the training for special forces spends far more time on negotiation, psychology, and de-escalation than it does on direct engagement. Most situations never require the kind of confrontation you witnessed at Halvan. Most are resolved long before that becomes necessary." "Then why did today's situation require it?" I asked. "Because the individuals responsible for the attack had already demonstrated they weren't interested in negotiation," Daniel said, speaking for the first time since I had arrived. "Once biological weapons and premeditated harm enter the equation, certain forms of resolution are no longer available. That doesn't mean force becomes the default response, but it does mean the range of acceptable outcomes narrows considerably." I found myself nodding slowly, beginning to piece together a more complete understanding of the organization that had, until recently, existed only as rumor and unease within coalition circles. "There is one more thing I would like to understand," I said. "Ella mentioned that the biological agent affected humans more slowly than it did coalition personnel. Is that a common vulnerability, or was this weapon specifically designed with that distinction in mind?" Felix's expression grew more serious. "That's actually one of the more concerning details Nathan uncovered during his analysis," he said. "The compound appears to have been specifically engineered to affect multiple species differently, likely an attempt to create confusion about the weapon's true purpose or origin. It's a level of sophistication that suggests significant resources and expertise went into its creation." "Which supports the theory of a larger, more organized faction," I said. "Exactly," Felix said. "This wasn't a single desperate act. This was one small piece of what appears to be a much larger and more troubling effort." The conversation shifted then toward more practical matters, the ongoing investigation into the captured operatives, the information still being gathered from records recovered aboard their vessel, and the broader implications for joint coalition and human security protocols moving forward. Despite the seriousness of the subject matter, I found the atmosphere among Felix, Claire, Daniel, and Grace surprisingly comfortable, filled with the kind of easy familiarity that comes from working closely together through difficult circumstances. At one point, as Felix described the tedious nature of post-operation documentation with exaggerated frustration, Daniel interjected dryly that Felix had once spent an entire evening drafting a single incident report simply because he couldn't decide on the correct wording for a single sentence. A story that drew genuine laughter from Claire and Grace, and even a reluctant smile from Felix himself. "It was an important sentence," Felix said, feigning offense. "It was 3 words long," Daniel replied. "Precisely why it needed to be correct," Felix said, and the entire group laughed again, myself included, feeling for the first time since this crisis began, a genuine sense of ease, rather than the tension that had defined every previous interaction. As the debriefing session drew toward its conclusion, I found myself reflecting on how much my understanding had shifted since my first encounter with the term Special Forces. What had once seemed like a source of unexplained dread now felt like a carefully considered response to genuine necessity, an organization built not from a desire for power or recognition, but from the difficult reality that some situations require exactly the kind of precision, restraint, and quiet capability I had witnessed at Halvin. "Thank you," I said to Felix as our meeting came to a close, "for taking the time to explain all of this. I confess, I arrived here still carrying a great deal of uncertainty about your team and about what your organization truly represents." "And now?" he asked. "Now I understand a little better," I said, "though I suspect there remains a great deal I still do not fully grasp." Felix offered a small, genuine smile. "That's probably for the best," he said. "The day we stop needing an organization like ours to remain something of a mystery is probably the day something has gone very wrong indeed." As I made my way back toward my own quarters following the debriefing, I found myself thinking not of fear, but of quiet respect for what I had witnessed over the past several days. The galaxy, I realized, did not fear special forces because of overwhelming strength or aggression. It respected them, cautiously and carefully, because of the understanding that their involvement meant a situation had already crossed a threshold most people hoped never to encounter. I did not yet know how significantly this single incident at Outpost Halvin would influence broader coalition and human relations moving forward, nor how deeply the details uncovered during this investigation would reshape security protocols across our shared territories. But I understood, walking quietly through the corridors of that administrative station, that my perspective on humanity and on the quiet, careful individuals who represented their final line of defense had changed permanently. 6 weeks passed before the full scope of what began at Outpost Halvin became clear to me, and by the time it did, I had been reassigned to a coordination role within the Coalition Border Authority, working directly alongside human intelligence liaisons to track the aftermath of the investigation that had started with a single, silent research station. The information recovered from the captured operatives, combined with the evidence gathered by Hannah's team, led investigators to uncover a network far larger than anyone had initially anticipated. The faction responsible for the attack, operating under a name that translated roughly to the Severance Collective, had been quietly testing biological and technological weapons against isolated joint stations for nearly 2 years, always careful to disguise their involvement, always calculating in their selection of targets that would draw minimal immediate attention. Outpost Halvin, it turned out, had not been their first target, merely the first to survive long enough for meaningful evidence to be gathered. 2 previous incidents, initially attributed to unfortunate accidents or unstable local factions, were quietly reclassified once investigators recognized matching patterns in the biological signatures and forged credentials used in each case. The revelation sent quiet ripples through coalition leadership, and for the first time in my career, I found myself present in high-level discussions between coalition officials and human military representatives, discussions that had previously remained far above my position within the border authority. During one such meeting, held aboard a neutral diplomatic vessel positioned between coalition and human territory, I listened as senior officials from both sides reviewed the footage and data gathered from Halvin, including recordings of Hannah's team during the brief confrontation with the returning operatives. The reaction among coalition leadership was one of quiet astonishment, not at the violence of the encounter, for there had been remarkably little, but at the precision and control demonstrated throughout. 4 individuals, one senior coalition administrator said, reviewing the footage for a second time. 4 individuals resolved a situation that could easily have escalated into a much larger crisis, and did so without a single unnecessary casualty. "That's rather the point," replied Commander Alice Whitmore, the senior human military representative present at the meeting. "Special Forces isn't measured by numbers deployed. It's measured by outcomes achieved with the least possible cost. And yet," another coalition official said carefully, "your species maintains such secrecy around this organization. If they represent such a valuable and controlled asset, why not utilize them more broadly, more publicly?" Commander Whitmore's expression grew thoughtful before she answered. because the moment we begin relying on them too frequently, it means our other systems have failed too often, she said, echoing almost precisely the sentiment Claire had shared with me weeks earlier. Special forces exists as a measure of last resort, not a first response. Using them too casually would undermine the very restraint that makes them effective. I found myself reflecting on those words long after the meeting concluded, recognizing how deeply this philosophy shaped not just human military doctrine, but the broader relationship between our two civilizations. Humanity, I had come to understand, did not seek to demonstrate strength through overwhelming displays of force or constant visibility of their most capable forces. Instead, they maintained careful restraint, keeping their most precise and effective response teams hidden from common awareness, deployed only when absolutely necessary, and always with the explicit goal of resolving situations rather than escalating them. This realization spread gradually throughout coalition military circles, as details of the Halvan incident became more widely known among senior officers and diplomatic personnel. What began as quiet rumors evolved into careful, measured respect, an understanding that humanity's true capability lay not in the size of their fleets or the number of soldiers they could deploy, but in the quiet, controlled precision of specialized teams kept deliberately out of common sight until circumstances demanded otherwise. Several other coalition species began quietly reviewing their own security protocols following the revelations from Halvan, recognizing that the Severance Collective likely intended to target additional joint stations across various border regions. Increased verification measures were implemented across diplomatic credential systems, closing many of the loopholes the collective had previously exploited so effectively. I maintained occasional contact with Claire, Daniel, and Grace throughout this period, exchanging updates as the broader investigation into the Severance Collective continued. Through these conversations, I learned that Hannah's team had been involved in at least 2 additional operations following Halvan, though the specific details remained classified beyond general confirmation that both situations had been resolved successfully. "They don't talk much about their operations," Claire told me during one such conversation, held over a secure communication channel while I reviewed updated station security protocols. Even among liaison staff like myself, details remain limited unless directly relevant to ongoing joint operations. "Does that not create difficulties?" I asked, coordinating without full information. "It requires trust," she said simply. "Trust that they're handling situations appropriately, even without constant oversight. It's taken years to build that kind of confidence between our organizations, but incidents like Halvan only reinforce why that trust matters." Nearly 3 months after the initial crisis, I received an unexpected personal message from Hannah Voss herself, a brief communication informing me that the broader investigation into the Severance Collective had led to a significant operational success, though details remained heavily restricted. She thanked me for my initial cooperation during the Halvan incident, noting that my willingness to authorize their deployment without full understanding of what that decision entailed had proven instrumental in preventing further loss of life. I found myself deeply moved by her message, recognizing how significant a role that single moment of decision, made under uncertainty and pressure, had played in uncovering a threat that could have caused far greater harm across coalition and human territories alike. During a subsequent joint diplomatic gathering held to formally review updated security cooperation agreements between our species, I found myself once again in the company of Commander Whitmore, who approached me directly following the conclusion of formal proceedings. "Officer Ondera," she said, extending a hand in the human gesture of greeting I had grown accustomed to over the years. "I understand you played a significant role in the events at Outpost Halvan. I simply authorized a request I did not fully understand at the time," I said honestly. "The true resolution belongs entirely to Hannah Voss and her team." Commander Whitmore's expression grew thoughtful. "That authorization mattered more than you realize," she said. "Trust between our species isn't built through grand gestures or formal treaties alone. It's built through moments like that, when someone chooses to trust something they don't fully understand, simply because the alternative risks far greater harm." I considered her words carefully, recognizing the truth within them. "May I ask you something, Commander?" I said. "Of course." During my time working alongside Hannah's team, and later during conversations with Felix and the others, I came to understand a great deal about the purpose and philosophy behind Special Forces. Yet I still find myself curious about something specific. Why maintain such secrecy, even now, even after an incident that so clearly demonstrated the value and careful restraint of your approach? Commander Whitmore considered the question for a long moment before responding. "Because visibility changes behavior," she said finally, "both our own and that of anyone observing us. If Special Forces became a publicly celebrated symbol of strength, it would create pressure to use them more frequently, to demonstrate capability rather than reserve it for genuine necessity. The moment that happens, the entire philosophy behind their existence begins to erode." "And the unease their mention creates among your own people?" I asked. "Even among trained military personnel, I have witnessed genuine discomfort at simply hearing the term spoken aloud." "That unease serves a purpose too," she said. "It reminds everyone, human and coalition alike, that their involvement represents a serious escalation, something to be avoided whenever possible through careful diplomacy, thorough investigation, and measured response. If people stopped feeling that unease, it would suggest we had become too comfortable relying on solutions that should remain rare." I found myself nodding slowly, recognizing the deep wisdom within her explanation, a philosophy built not from arrogance or desire for mystery, but from careful consideration of how visibility and frequency shape behavior across an entire civilization. As the diplomatic gathering drew to its conclusion, I found myself reflecting on the entire journey that had begun with a single silent research station and expanded into a deeper understanding of humanity's most carefully guarded military philosophy. What started as fear born from ignorance had, through direct experience and honest conversation, transformed into genuine respect grounded in understanding. The Severance Collective's broader network continued to be dismantled over the following months, largely through continued cooperation between coalition intelligence services and human special forces operations, though details of these continued efforts remained appropriately restricted from general circulation. Joint stations across coalition and human territories implemented stronger verification protocols, closing many of the vulnerabilities that had allowed the initial attack to succeed so completely. I eventually returned to standard border patrol duties, though my perspective on humanity and on the quiet, careful individuals who represented their most capable response to genuine crisis remained permanently altered by everything I had witnessed. I no longer viewed the unease surrounding Special Forces as evidence of hidden danger or unchecked power, but rather as a carefully maintained reminder of restraint, precision, and the genuine weight carried by those capable of resolving situations that others could not. Many cycles later, during a quiet evening shared with several coalition officers at a small gathering following a routine training exercise, the conversation turned briefly toward rumors of human military capability, as it often did among those unfamiliar with direct experience of joint operations. A younger officer, newly assigned to border duty, asked with genuine curiosity what I knew about the mysterious human unit referred to only as Special Forces. I considered the question carefully before answering, recalling the quiet corridors of Outpost Halvin, the calm precision of Hannah's team, and the deep philosophical understanding shared with me by Felix and Commander Whitmore alike. "They are not something to fear in the way you might imagine," I said finally. "They are not defined by overwhelming strength or destructive capability. They are defined by restraint, precision, and the understanding that some situations require exactly the right response, delivered with exactly the right amount of force, and not a fraction more." "Then why does everyone react with such unease at the mere mention of their name?" the young officer asked. I thought of Claire's quiet whisper aboard that shuttle so many cycles earlier, the weight carried within those simple words she had spoken before any of us truly understood what we were about to witness. "Because their presence means a situation has already become serious enough to require them," I said, "and because somewhere, quietly, and without any desire for recognition, a small group of individuals stand ready to handle whatever comes next, hoping deeply that they are never actually needed at all. The young officer considered this answer thoughtfully, though I could see the same unease I had once carried myself beginning to settle over his expression. The same quiet understanding that some things in this galaxy are respected not because of the harm they cause, but because of the careful, deliberate restraint they represent. We call it special forces, and across 1,000 worlds, in quiet corridors and distant border stations, the galaxy continues to hope, sincerely and deeply, that they never have reason to meet them at all.